Tengri's lightning split the Altai mountains in two. The sky itself bled indigo over the steppe. But the ancient texts tell a version of this story that your history teacher never mentioned. This was not mere punishment. It was the forging of a legend that would bridge worlds. On that scorched ridge, where the Orkhon River carves through eternal stone, the Oghuz Turks had long known the name Zulkarneyn from the whispered tales of travelers and the verses of wandering Ozans. He was something older, stranger, a two-horned warrior king who rode out of the east with an army that spoke every tongue under Tengri's blue dome. The Book of Dede Korkut, that great epic of the Oghuz people, would one day preserve his story, written down in the 15th century. Dede Korkut himself, the white-bearded sage and prophet of the steppe, first spoke of Zulkarneyn as the ideal ruler, a man who carried justice in one hand and a sword in the other. This is the king who walked to the rising sun and the setting sun and bowed only to Tengri above. Before the name Zulkarneyn was ever sung in the epics, the Oghuz Turks lived beneath a sky that had no ceiling. Below them, the Tengri range stretched toward the horizon, and between these two sacred mountain chains, the steppe opened its endless arms. 1,000 campfires burned each night, and the smoke rose straight up toward Tengri, the eternal blue sky. A boy learned to ride before he could walk, gripping the mane of a shaggy steppe pony, while his father's hand held him steady. The women milked the mares and churned Kumis in leather bags, while the men hunted with golden eagles on their arms, the great birds scanning the grass for foxes and wolves. They did not build cities of stone, for stone was dead. They built their world from wool. And in the center of every camp there was a fire that never went out. The shamans, the kamlar, tended these flames. They wore robes made from the skins of wolves and bears, their faces painted with ochre and ash, and they spoke to the spirits of the mountains. When a warrior fell, the shaman guided his soul to the white road that led to the ancestors. This was the world before Zulkarneyn. But that world was about to change, for a rider was coming from the edge of the known earth, and his shadow fell across the steppe like the wing of a great eagle. His name had been Alexander, born in Pella, the capital of Macedon, in the year 356 before the birth of the prophet, a king who wept when there were no more lands to conquer, who marched his phalanxes through the scorched gates of Persepolis. But the Alexander who arrived on the steppe was already becoming something else, something the Greek historians would never recognize. It grew, in the centuries that followed, a vast body of stories known as the Alexander Romance. Egyptian scribes, Persian poets, Syrian monks, each culture took the Macedonian king and remade him in their own image. They gave him wings to fly through the air. The historical general became a mythic wanderer, a seeker of immortality, a king who walked the edge of the known world and spoke with the spirits of the dead. In the Quran's Surah Al-Kahf, the 18th chapter, a figure appears who is called Zulkarneyn, the two-horned one. He traveled to the setting sun, where he found it setting in a muddy spring. He traveled to the rising sun, where he found a people with no shelter from its heat. And finally, he journeyed to a pass between two mountains, where a tribe begged him to build a barrier against the chaos of Gog and Magog. When the Oghuz Turks began converting to Islam in the 8th and 9th centuries, they encountered this figure through Persianate literary traditions that had already fused Alexander with Zulkarneyn. In his place stood a Turkic hero, a man who rode a horse from the Altai, who spoke the language of the steppe. The stranger who approached the campfires of the Oghuz was no longer a foreign king. He was one of their own, reborn in the fire of cultural transformation. The Book of Dede Korkut does not introduce Zulkarneyn as a stranger. It presents him as the mirror in which every Oghuz Khan must see his own reflection. When the white-bearded sage Dede Korkut sings of the two-horned one, his voice carries the weight of generations. This is not history, but instruction. Zulkarneyn, in the epic's telling, he does not conquer for glory alone. He conquers to establish order, to protect the weak. The Oghuz storytellers wove Zulkarneyn from threads of two worlds. From the Shamanic tradition came the gray wolf that guides his path through unknown lands. From the Islamic revelation came his prostration toward Mecca, his recitation of prayers before battle. It felt natural to a people who had always believed that Tengri spoke through thunder and that the ancestors whispered in the wind. Zulkarneyn stood beneath that single dome, 1 foot in the steppe's ancient memory. The Book of Dede Korkut, written down in the 15th century, preserves Zulkarneyn not as a historical figure, but as a narrative function. The Khans who listen to these words are meant to measure themselves against Zulkarneyn's standard. So must you. Did he build walls against the enemy? Did he bow to Tengri and Allah alike? It cares about the ideal king that the Oghuz people needed to imagine for themselves. This is why the Book of Dede Korkut endures as the foundational text of modern Turkey. It is not a chronicle of what happened. It is a chronicle of what the Oghuz believed a ruler should be. Zulkarneyn, the two-horned one, rides through its pages as a living lesson, a king who conquered not to enslave but to build. The story of Zulkarneyn might have remained locked in the oral traditions of the steppe, sung only around dying campfires. F. von Diez, searching through the royal library of Dresden, he did not know he held the soul of a people, the Book of Dede Korkut, written down in the 15th century. When von Diez opened its pages, the voice of the Oghuz bards echoed across a continent. European scholars realized this was not a crude tribal chronicle, but a sophisticated epic, a literary masterpiece that preserved the worldview of an entire civilization. The two-horned one was no longer just a figure for the clans of the Altai. He was now a subject of comparative mythology. In the centuries that followed, the legend became a cornerstone of Turkic national identity. In modern Turkey, it is a living text, recited in schools, adapted into films, and studied by scholars who trace the threads of their cultural DNA back to those 15th century pages. Zulkarneyn stands at the center of this heritage. They transformed them. They took a Macedonian king and made him their own, proving that every culture reshapes history into myth. What remains today is not a wall of iron or a palace of stone. The legend survives in the living epic tradition, in the voices of storytellers who still recite the words of Dede Korkut. The hero, in the end, is not the one who conquers foreign lands. The hero is the one who becomes a vessel for his people's highest ideals.